Hello and welcome to Nature and Environment. And today I'll be talking about the oceans or the seas. I want to look at the various divisions of the territorial waters owned by the coastal countries or states. Lastly, I will establish the extent to which coastal countries or states can exercise their right over the usage of the territorial waters. Now, the first question that someone would ask is, what is the difference between the sea and the ocean? Well, this ocean is an unbounded body of water that hosts the continent as islands. However, the sea is also a body of water that is located where the ocean meets the land. So I can say that the sea is usually and partially bounded by a piece of land. Now let's get into the division of the territorial waters. From the diagram here, you would realize that I have a black line that runs all over here, and then it goes up here. It's a line that demarcates the land from the sea. So upward here is the sea, and then downward here is the land. There is also, so as you can see over here, we have country A, country B, country C, country D, and country E. Now there's also a red line that is drawn immediately above the black line. This line is also called the baseline. Now, the baseline is defined by series of shoreline for which the average has been taken, and it is marked on a large scale chart recognized by the coastal states. So the red line here is the reference for which all measurements seaward are made. So now let's look at it. The red line here distinguishes the sea from the land. Now, as you can see over here, we have parcels of water bodies here, all over here, all over here, all over here, and then you can see all over here as well. Now, these waters that are landward of the red mark is referred to as the internal waters. Now, what do we mean by internal waters? The rivers, the lakes, and also tidal waters. Now, this is the portion of the water environment that the coastal state has sovereignty over the seabed, the subsoil, the airspace above it, and the surface water. Now, what I mean here is that no other state is allowed to make entry into these internal waters without explicit permission. But there's exception to this rule. Now, if you have a group of islands somewhere here, usually the baseline is drawn after the last island seaward. Now, if you have a group of islands here, if you use the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, you realize that the right of passage, such as innocent passage, must be allowed in this area. And a typical example has to do with the Philippines and that of Indonesia, because they have a number of islands. Okay. Now let's start from here. Now you could see if you move all the way up here, you have covered 12 nautical miles. And this area is referred to as the Territorial Sea. So it can be drawn all the way here, all the way here, all the way here up there. Okay, cool. This is also an area that the coastal state has a full sovereignty over the airspace, the surface water, the seabed, and that of the subsoil. Now, at this point, the right of passage is also limited, with the exception of innocent passage and transit passage. I would explain what we mean by innocent passage. Innocent passage is that, for instance, a foreign ship, being military or civilian, can make its way into the coastal waters here. Now, the behavior of the foreign ship should be in conformity to that of the law of the sea. Anything against this thing can be stopped by the coastal states. Okay. The territorial limit over here can be extended. Now, usually we do have a problem. What the problem is that in an attempt to extend this territorial mark over here, you may end up running into another state's territorial waters. So let's look at it. Now we have country C here, and then we have country D here. Now, if we go by the principle, we realize that yours will be extending all the way, or yours will be extending, and then somewhere here you may be running into the other's country as well. So what we do is that usually we use median to establish a peaceful territorial sea mark. Or one of the countries may decide, I wouldn't like to have a large territorial sea area, and then this thing can be resolved peacefully. Let's look at the next belt of coastal water. This stretches from here and then all the way here, and we call it contiguous zone. Now, with the contiguous zone, the country has a limited control of preventing and punishing any infringement in terms of fiscal, custom, migration, pollution, sanitation, among others. Now, within this zone here, the airspace above is an international space. And now, the water body from this mark upward is also considered international waters. So, there's one thing about this area. What is it? There is no standard rule in settling conflict among states or countries, unlike this side. Why? This is called the exclusive economic zone. This is a zone or a region where the coastal country has an exclusive right over the economic resources over here. So at this point, or within this region, the country can exploit, can protect and conserve the resources over here. Again, the country also has the right to conduct any marine scientific research within this area. The country also has the right to preserve and protect the marine resources within this zone. Lastly, the country can also establish and use artificial islands, installations, and structures within this zone. Now, when we talk about the resources that are found within this area for which the country has an absolute control, they include both living and non-living. However, the airspace above this area belongs to the international world, and the water body found within this region is also referred to as an international water. Now, let's look at the band that lies beyond the 200 nautical mile. This is what is called the Continental Shelf. The Continental Shelf forms part of the continental margin. Now, what do we mean by continental margin? Continental margin is just an extension of the land towards the sea. So, the continental margin consists of three major portions. One is the continental shelf, which is the gradual sloping part. And then we have the very steep sloping part, which is called the continental slope. And then we have the more gradual sloping part, which is called the sea bed or the sea floor. Okay, so every coastal country has the right to extend or increase this thing to additional 150 nautical miles. However, in doing this, you have to submit scientific information to the United Nations in charge of continental shelf and be able to defend your claim for why you want to make this extension. Now, this commission will make a decision, and the decision is final and binding. You cannot go back and say they need to have a second look at it. Okay, so this is the area where usually we have a lot of what marine resources. Okay, let's look at some of the incidents that have been associated with these territorial demarcations and all that. So Canada and France had it some time back, and then it was resolved. Libya and US also had a similar problem in the 80s that led to what is called the Gulf of Sidra incident. Ghana, Ivory Coast had it not too long ago, and then also Nigeria and Cameroon also had it. So we have seen a number of conflict in relation to the territorial demarcation of water bodies. Okay, but there's one that interests me most, and that is the Tampa affairs, and I'll tell you why. So somewhere in August 2001, there was a small Indonesian fishing boat called Palapa. So Palapa had on board 433 passengers who were heading towards Australia. The people on board were asylum seekers from Afghanistan. So unfortunately for them, while they were in the international waters, their engine went dead and they became stranded for a couple of days. So fortunately or unfortunately, there was a Norwegian ship that was heading to Singapore, but came across these guys on sea. So this Norwegian ship called Tampa rescued these guys. But if you apply the law of the sea, you realize that if you come across an incident of this sort, what will happen is that you save the situation, and then on your route to your destination, you would drop these passengers to the nearest seaport. Now, something interesting happened on the ship. After rescuing these guys, Tampa decided to take them to the nearest island, which is Indonesia, But unfortunately, this guy said no, they won't go there. And if Tampa would try and, send them back to Indonesia, they would commit suicide. Now, Tampa turned around and decided to head towards the Australian waters. Now, there was a communication between Tampa and the Australian authorities. And then they said that Tampa, don't come into our waters. Send these people back to Indonesia. Now, looking at the situation on ship, Tampa decided to get or move into the Australian waters. And finally landed around one of the Australian, islands called the Christmas Island. So this really created a diplomatic dispute between the Norwegian government and that of the Australian government. Now, you could see that there was a breach of, the law of the sea. There was, a kind of humanitarian faith that was shown by Tampa and all that. So, why am I so interested in this? This thing gave birth to a turning point in immigration process called the offshore immigration process. And in my next video, I'll be speaking to this issue. So in summary, all that I'm saying that though the ocean is a very big body of water, or the sea is still a big body of water, we have demarcations. And if you cross into somebody's territory, then you're going to bring about disputes. You're going to bring about international controversy. So states actually as we are, or states actually as they are, they know all these rules and they know where to operate in order to, avoid any conflict between any other country. And where they have conflict, they can, resolve this issue diplomatically among themselves. But if it goes beyond that point, then it will go to the Abuna in charge of the law of the sea, so that they could resolve this issue out. Okay, so I would say like my page, share my page, and do subscribe. Thank you for your time.